Today on the podcast, guys, I am taking part in Non-Fiction November, where I suggest a bunch of non-fiction books for you that hopefully you will like and enjoy. So if that sounds interesting to you, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. My name is Seamus. How are we doing today? I hope we are all very, very well, and I hope we're all reading some good books. And if you're not reading some good books, I hope that maybe this podcast will suggest to you a good book or two. If you're a returning customer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. And if you're joining us for the first time, this is a book podcast. Normally, I do one book a week with a few other segments as well, but today I'm actually doing just a bunch of books based on the topic. And otherwise just a book podcast. If there's a book you want me to do, comment, send me a message, comment on the video. I don't know, just throw it out there. I'm always looking for more and more suggestions, so they're really appreciated. I try to get to all of them. We're having fun. You're having fun, hopefully. I hope so. I'm having fun. Today I'm doing Non-Fiction November. I was tagged in a video by a fellow booktuber, Kate. I'll put her details below because she had a fantastic episode on this as well. And it's called Non-Fiction November, which I absolutely love that tag. I thought it was a fantastic idea. And as soon as she tagged me, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to do an episode on that because that sounds like just an incredible amount of fun. And I think as well because I've read a lot of non-fiction books just by virtue of my undergraduate was ancient history and literature. And then I did a master's in archaeology, specializing in Roman history. So a lot of non-fiction. I've specifically tried to avoid a lot of those books because some of them are quite dense and dry and probably not for, I don't want to say the average reader, but just someone just trying to enjoy and learn a bit more. Some of them are quite dense and not as enjoyable as some other retellings and other non-fiction books. So I've got a nice little pile here. I guess I should address maybe the elephant in the room if you're a returning customer. Different background today. That's because I'm in a different country. I am in my parents' house today in my old bedroom. You can't see that, thankfully, because I'm back in Australia visiting for a friend's wedding. So it was actually kind of nice because when I originally moved from Australia to England, I had a lot of books that I couldn't take with me because books weigh a fair bit, and it turns out you need a few other essential items in your suitcase. You can't just pack it out with books. So I had to leave a lot behind, and my parents very generously let me keep them all here. So it's always fun to sort of visit again and rifle through my books. And this was a great opportunity to do it because I've spoken about a few books already that I would have done and they're back in London. So it was great to sort of, I guess, go through my books and pull out some non-fiction books. So this is just a small little snippet, some non-fiction books. I do also want to say that I think 4 episodes ago, I did an episode called 5 Books That Will Change Your Life. And there was quite, I think, 3 of those books I would probably also recommend that would have made an appearance in this pile if I hadn't just done them in an episode. Raina Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, I think, is absolutely fantastic and well worth a read. William Styron's Depression, very much well worth a read. What else did I do? Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing. I know that's kind of autobiographical, so it's probably blending between fiction and non-fiction. Same again with Wind, Sand and Stars by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. But they're 4 incredible books that I would absolutely put on the pile here. But I won't talk about them because I spoke about them in an episode only a few weeks ago. Another one I will quickly mention, just because I don't have the book here, I left it in London, and Kate actually spoke about this in her episode, is Papyrus by Irene Vallejo. It's a fantastic book about the history of books themselves, and it's told in a really, really nice and rich way. She hasn't just kind of written a book that's sort of detailing facts as, bland facts. She's actually got a fantastic writing style and it makes it really enjoyable to read. It's got a really interesting storytelling perspective to the history of books. So I think I'm 100, 150 pages into that. I'm kind of reading like a chapter or two a day and absolutely loving it. And I genuinely would recommend that. If I had the book with me, it would be on this pile and recommended. So I think we should start recommending some books because that's what we're here for. Like I said, I've tried to keep it, I guess, as interesting as possible, as accessible as possible, I should say, because I've read some very dense history books and some of them are not even enjoyable for me. And yeah, that's not good. I've got two of these little ones, two little black penguin books. These were fantastic when they first started coming out. I mean, they originally were £1 each. I think they're like 3 or 4 now. Isn't that terrible? Capitalism. The first one is Plato, Socrates' Defense. I really enjoy this. I've read this once, maybe twice, and would genuinely recommend it. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher. He's known as the founder of Western philosophy, if you can sort of tag that onto one person, and he was charged with corrupting the minds of the youths of the day and sort of sentenced to death, I believe it was. Yeah, sentenced to death for corrupting the youth of ancient Athens. Socrates, Plato's teacher, founded Western philosophy. Great little book. The reason I'm recommending these two little black books is because they're incredibly brief, and that's sort of what I love about them. This one is 50 pages, and they're 50 small pages at that. So that's, I said I was trying not to sort of suggest some really rich, dense history books, but I think when they're small and accessible like that, they're pretty interesting. 50 pages, not too bad. The other one is by Livy, the ancient Roman writer, and it's Hannibal. And Hannibal was a man that marched his elephants across the Alps to attack Rome. And I mean, he's, I'll read the back again. One of Rome's greatest historians recounts the military genius Hannibal's crossing the Alps with 21 elephants and winning the famed Battle of the Trebia. Another thrilling little tale when you consider it. I mean, the reason I picked up this one, not just because it's about Rome, which I absolutely love, but at the start of these books, they always have a passage, a little quote, I guess. And I probably should save this for the end of the episode to speak about because I always finish with a quote, but this is too good. We can't go past it. This is the quote, and this is something Hannibal says. "We have nothing left in the world but what we can win with our swords." Thrilling, absolutely chilling. What a brilliant, beautiful little quote that is. So I'd recommend those two. Next on the pile is a book that I think I read my first year of university, and it's a really foundational book, and it sort of really opened my perspective as to what history is and what that actually means. It's a brilliant nonfiction book. It's What is History by E.H. Carr. It's basically a book of essays about exactly that, what is history, and it's sort of dissecting it in various fundamental ways. But one of the main and most important points for me, at least, that I absolutely loved was this idea: if you have a mountain just, in the middle, just a mountain, and you put an artist at the north side, south side, east side, and west side and get them to paint or sketch or draw the mountain, all of them are going to have a different version of what the mountain looks like, though they're all drawing, sketching, painting the same mountain. And that's exactly the issue with history. It's we're all trying to capture the same history, but from our own perspectives. And I just remember reading that and being blown away at the simplicity of it, but sort of the richness and depth that it sort of gets to. It sort of cuts through a lot of the bullshit out there and really just accurately depicts what history is and the struggle that we have with history and our collective history. So I always loved that. It was a hugely influential book for me, and it's actually pretty readable, even if you're not studying history at university. I thought it was incredibly readable and an incredibly interesting read because I think it's just one of those books that makes you think about what you're actually learning and getting to ask questions in different ways. So I would absolutely recommend that. What is History by E.H. Carr. Fantastic book. Loved it. What do we got here? Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Another great book. A book of another one of these sort of like penguin books. Great ideas. So like a condensed version of the larger version. The most famous essay in here is, of course, The Myth of Sisyphus, where the title gets its name. And, on the cover, there is only one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. The Myth of Sisyphus. I mean, Albert Camus in general is just a fantastic writer. If you haven't read some of his stuff like The Fall or The Plague, they're absolutely brilliant. The Stranger as well is also fantastic. And then The Myth of Sisyphus is absolutely I think really, really relevant at this day and age because it's about a guy, Sisyphus, who is condemned to always push a rock up a hill, and the rock always then rolls down. And it's sort of, from memory, it's if he can get the rock to the top of the hill, or this giant boulder, I should say, if he can get it to the top of the hill, he's free. But always at the last moment, it slips from his grasp and it rolls back down the hill. And so he's sort of condemned to constantly, always, for the rest of history, for the rest of time, roll this boulder up a hill. And it's kind of like, how can we imagine someone happy when they're sort of in this eternal servitude? And the reason I say it's quite pertinent today is because I know a lot of people feel just incredibly overworked and burnt out. And in a lot of parts of the world at the moment, there is a cost of living crisis, and it feels like just constant, like 5 days a week, 7, 8 hours a day, just constant work. Then you got to get home, drive through traffic, put the washing on, do the shopping, cook the food. And it's all just kind of like this relentless thing that we're just sort of participating in, trying to survive through. And it's sort of, what are we doing here? What is the meaning of all this? Where's the victory in it? So fantastic book of essays. There's other essays in there as well. I loved it. If you go through it, it's just scribbled. I've just absolutely gone to war with this book, and it's just filled with my pencil and my pencil markings and my notes and everything like that. But that's a fantastic non-fiction November recommendation, The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. The next book, Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Fantastic book. He's actually written quite a few books, and he is an what is he? He's a neurological doctor, I believe, something to do with neurological disorders. And it's basically just him talking about different cases he came across in the times that he was a doctor, and all these sort of different interesting cases. I remember reading it and thinking it's the frustrating thing about it is that because, one, I imagine this was written, I think it was written in the 80s, possibly the 90s, and two, that wasn't an issue, that was just stating a fact. The issue with it is that there's not a lot of answers for these neurological disorders, and so a lot of the stories are like, oh, we're presented with a really interesting case, we analyze the case for what it is, but at the end there's actually not a lot of resolution because we don't know a lot, and it sort of highlights just how, I guess, in the dark we are when it comes to these neurological disorders, but it is still nonetheless incredibly fascinating. It's a really interesting and rich read. I had a lot of fun because they're different case studies and different patient studies. It's like all nonfiction books, you can just dip in and out, and you can read one case study a week or a month, a year, whatever you want to do. I've recommended this one in particular, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, purely because I have it and I think it's a fun cover, but there are others as well that he's done. I think there was 3 or 4 that he possibly did from memory. But yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the back here. If a man has lost a leg or an eye, he knows he has lost a leg or an eye. But if he has lost himself, he cannot know it, because he is no longer there to know it. So that's kind of some of the questions that are being raised through this, and some of the questions that are explored through this story. Like I said, it's kind of tough in that there's not a lot of answers in it, but that's because there's not a lot of answers in the neurological landscape of the medical world at this stage, because we are still just such an incredibly dense and, I guess, confusing animal and being that exists in this world, and we don't really understand why. So that was fun to read. Plato, making 2 appearances on this list. That was not planned. Plato, the Symposium. I love this one because I read it a long time ago, and it's basically just a bunch of guys getting drunk and talking about love. And they're talking about the philosophical meaning of love and what that actually looks like, and what it sort of, how it takes form. It's all about Socrates. Socrates is a fantastic guy. Go and check him out. Sort of the best thing about Plato is the fact that he captured so much of what Socrates did. And it's basically just these guys getting drunk in the Athenian world back in, I think it was 350 BC, maybe even 400 BC, and just talking about love. And is there any better way to do it than to just get drunk on wine and discuss the philosophical implications of love? I don't know, but it's a lot of fun for that. It's not that long. I believe it was about 60 pages. So it's not too long, and I guess because they're drunk, it's a whole lot of fun as well. There's, with all these books, there's kind of like an introduction and all that kind of stuff, but I went straight for the Symposium because it was a great amount of fun. So I'd recommend that just because, I don't know, there's just something so funny about something being considered a classic when really it was just a bunch of dudes getting drunk on wine and talking about love. And now, what, 2,500 years later, we're like, this is incredible. This is peak philosophical literature. I absolutely love it. So yeah, I love it for that reason as well. Next book, SPQR, Senatus Populus K. Romanos, by the wonderful Mary Beard. Big fan of Mary Beard. I've read quite a few of her books. I've got another one on this list here, which I will probably hold up when we get to it, The 12 Caesars, and she's actually written another book called Women in Power. She's written a lot of books, what am I saying? But the ones I've read, Women in Power was absolutely fantastic. I couldn't find my copy of it, which is simply why I'm holding up this, and I've probably got more emotional attachment to SPQR, but Women in Power was absolutely fantastic and a bit shorter as well, quite a bit shorter. SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome. I mean, if you've listened to this episode from the beginning, that's exactly why I picked it, because Mary Beard is the famed author, famed historian of the Roman world. She's absolutely fantastic. There's actually an incredibly good, if you're looking for some other viewing, there's this, I guess it's like a debate sort of forum called Intelligence Squared, and I don't know what year it was, but she did a debate against Boris Johnson, and it was, Mary Beard was arguing that the Roman world was more important and influential, and Boris Johnson was arguing that ancient Greek world was more important and influential upon the modern world. And it's this really, I guess, interesting and fun debate that they have. You know, whatever you think of Boris Johnson, he is incredibly fun in this particular scenario. And it was actually the first time I learned of Boris Johnson, because I'm not traditionally from the UK, so this is back when he was the mayor of London, and I, didn't know who he was because he was just a mayor of London. So that was actually my first introduction to Boris Johnson, which is actually all kinds of funny. Yeah, it was good. But the point is, go watch that because that's a lot of fun. But SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome, is just a wonderful story. I mean, she's basically taking a lot of the books that I was talking about at the start of the episode, these really, really dense stories, and she's writing them back down in a more, I don't want to say simplistic, but more accessible way, a way that sort of cuts out a lot of the nonsense that you don't really need to know and a lot of the dry stuff, and makes it more interesting and readable. And it's just, I mean, it's fantastic. It's the perfect book to give someone, because as with all nonfiction books, you don't have to read them cover to cover. You can just jump in and out. And Mary Beard is a fantastic writer. I would genuinely recommend all the stuff that she's written, because she's incredibly knowledgeable. She is absolutely, like, I'm a big fan of her. That's what I'm getting at. But this book in particular, I think, is just, it's incredibly well researched, but you don't feel like you're getting absolutely bombarded with history. And I don't mean that in a bad way as well. Obviously, you feel like you're learning something, but it's not so incredibly dense that you get tired while watching. It's not the kind of nonfiction book where you read one page and you're like, oh, that was tough. I need to go to bed now. No, it's the kind of book where you can read, a chapter at a time, 2 chapters at a time. It's incredibly accessible. It's an incredible amount of fun, and it's readable, and it's a really nice writing style. So I'd recommend that. Senatus Populus K. Romanos, Senate for the People of Rome, SPQR, by Mary Beard. Love that one. I have read that one cover to cover. Hardcover, A Moveable Feast, Ernest Hemmingway. Again, probably one that's blending fiction and non-fiction together, but still a great amount of fun and a great insight into what life in 20s in Paris was like. Ernest Hemmingway, of course, one of the more famous authors of literature history. It's a book about his time in Paris as quite a young guy. I believe he was 26 at this stage in his life. And it's just kind of, I guess, just a book exploring what his life was like back then. That in itself makes it sort of very much a book you should read. It is, I think, to this day, still my favorite Hemingway, even though he's got some fantastic actual stories that he's written, Fiesta or The Sun Also Rises, depending on your edition. He's got some great short stories as well. But I think A Moveable Feast, just for the pure fact that, one, it combines his absolutely wonderful writing style, the short, stark declarative sentences. I think it's the combination of that with the mixing of the real world experiences that really makes it a really, really interesting read. And I mean, I absolutely love Paris as well. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful city. So to see it through the eyes of someone or one of the greater writers of history, I think is really interesting, and to see how they sort of lived and the life that they sort of carried on through and with and about is just absolutely fantastic. A Moveable Feast is just such a great way to describe it. It's I love it. I mean, if you've never read this, but you've seen the film Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen, I believe it is, that's sort of what he's based it on. He's based it on these experiences. Hemmingway, of course, makes an appearance in that, and I believe Owen Wilson, the titular character, does mention a movable feast quite early in the beginning. So that's what that's based upon. So if you're interested in that film, check out this book, because it's the same thing. It's kind of like snapshots into the life of what it was like to be a writer sort of struggling in the 20s in Paris, which is just absolutely fantastic. I'll briefly touch upon this book just because I did an episode on it. The Wager by David Grann, I think, is absolutely fantastic and deserves another shout out as well. He did, for those of you who don't know, David Grann also did Killers of the Flower Moon, which then, of course, Martin Scorsese turned into a film starring Leonardo DiCaprio, and I am 99% sure that Scorsese has acquired the rights for this, The Wager. It's a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. It's absolutely thrilling. It's incredibly readable. Go watch the episode on that, though, because I'm not going to talk about it anymore right now. This book I haven't actually read. I bought it just before I moved to London a couple years ago, and then I realized it was an incredibly heavy book. 12 Caesars by Mary Beard, beautiful hardcover. Simply putting it there because the hardcover was fantastic, and it was a beautiful, beautiful book. This pile is getting so big and precarious now on the opposite side. Finally, I'm just going to recommend this one. It's a book of essays on art by Julian Barnes. He's an incredible author as well. I did The Sense of an Ending, which was an episode I did probably 20 episodes ago now. Keeping an Eye Open, essays on art. Just, if you're looking for a book on art essays that are really, really good, this is the book for you. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I think I read probably 90% of the essays in here and loved them all. I think he's got a really fresh and interesting take on these various artists that he discusses through the book. Julian Barnes is an incredible writer. He's got such a keen attention for different areas of life, and he's got such a philosophical understanding of how people move through the world. So I really love that about his writing. But this is just a fantastic book, Keeping an Eye Open, essays on art, which I absolutely love because I like art, and you sometimes just want to read like a really great essay on a particular artist, because like sometimes looking at the art doesn't go deep enough if we're, I'm assuming majority of people listening to this are readers, and sometimes just looking at art doesn't go to that depth. You actually want to hear what someone else has to say and explore what the artist went through and give it to us all on the page. So reading some essays on art is always, I think, just a really beneficial way to make the artist and the painting come alive just that little bit more. Well, that is quite a list. It is quite a list indeed. What is that? 11 books, but I think I mentioned another 4 or 5 before I even got to the start of this list. So that is quite a list of books that I've just absolutely torn through. I hope I haven't spoken too quickly and given you sort of like enough of an overview about each book that maybe interests you. I tried to keep it, as fresh and as interesting. I mean, there's so many more I could recommend. Stephen Fry's on the history front has done his Mythos and Troy and Heroes. They're also incredibly accessible books that explore the ancient world in a really fresh and new way that makes them really readable and interesting. Stuff like that. I think we're living just in a great time for books and sort of reimaginings and retellings and re-explorations of various stories. And like I said, with this story of by Irene Vallejo, the book I mentioned, Papyrus, just taking a topic as potentially dry as the history of books and putting it into this incredibly beautiful writing style and storytelling aspect that explores how books sort of came about through society is just I think we're just living in such a fantastic time for books and storytelling, and it's great. So hopefully you got some recommendations from that. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly and rush over too many of them. I tried to keep as many in. I tried to keep them as fresh and as interesting and as exciting as possible. Yeah, that was, I think I might have spoken too quickly, but that's okay. So I guess now I should have done this at the start, but if you would like to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. If you'd like to subscribe, click the duck in the corner on YouTube. 5-star reviews are also a great way to help this, podcast grow and help other people find it. Like I said, if you have any recommendations for me, please comment on the video. Send me an email, an Instagram, a Twitter or an X or whatever it's called these days. Threads, I don't know, all the social medias. I've got them all. Send me a message or just say hi. I don't mind. I'll respond. I'll say hi back. So yeah, I think it is time to end this episode. So today, to take us away, a bit of Plato and this wonderful line from Socrates about his defense. And I think this is, I mean, it's a funny line. So I'll just read it out and let you guys interpret it how you will. I'll stop doing it as soon as I understand what I'm doing.